Hi guys, in today's video we're going to be painting a Nurgle Plague Hulk from start to finish. But first of all, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Ray who sent me this model out for me to paint for him. And also I want to say a huge thank you to my sponsor Goblin Gaming. If you follow the link in the description box down below, you can go directly to Goblin Gaming's web store. Okay guys, this video is going to be fairly long, so go grab yourselves a nice hot drink and we'll get started. The first thing I do is prime the miniature in Vallejo's polyurethane grey primer. As you can see, the miniature has already been primed. Here I'm spraying Vallejo Game Air chainmail on all the parts of the model that are going to be metallic. There's a reason I spray the metallics first. Metallics can be really messy even in the airbrush and can leave speckled paint behind on coloured parts which are really hard to remove without painting over or doing extensive masking. So it's easier to do the metallics first and then to do the actual colour paint afterwards. I'm spraying it about 2 to 3 inches away from the model, and I'm really not too worried about where the metallic paint goes. If it goes on any other part of the model, it's not a worry as it's going to be sprayed over in its corresponding colour later on. The most important thing is to get a nice smooth even coat, and if it's not smooth and even on the first pass, I'll come back around for the second pass until I've got that nice smooth metallic finish. It's also worth noting that I've thinned down the chainmail air from Vallejo with some Vallejo acrylic thinner. The reason I've done this is because sometimes the metallics are thicker than the regular pre-thinned acrylic paints that you can get in the Game Air or the Model Air range. So I've thinned it down, 1 drop of thinner to 2 drops of chainmail, and I find it sprays out the airbrush smoother that way. Here I'm starting to pre-shade the model using Vallejo Model Air Black. I'm looking for areas on the model where shadows would naturally form, so under the arms, around the banding on the arms where the creases are, underneath his pectoral muscles, if you can call them pectoral muscles. I'd say rolls of fat, but there you go. That's where most of the shading's going, and around the sides of his jowls on his head, and there's some dips on his back as well. The great thing about pre-shading is it's really simple to do, and also if you make mistakes, by mistakes I mean adding too much of the pre-shading, you can cover it up in the next stage when you start adding the base coat. The base colour I'm using is Vallejo Model Air Interior Green. This is where you can control how much of the pre-shading shows through from underneath the interior green. So I spray really lightly just to make sure that I'm controlling to see how much of that shadow actually seeps through from underneath the green. I am trying to be mindful not to get any of the interior green on the metallic areas, but it's not 100% crucial. If I do make a mistake and get some of the interior green on the metallics, I'm actually adding rust to the metallics as well, so I can easily cover them up with a happy accident if you like. Here you see I'm working at much closer range, about half an inch away from the model. This is to ensure that I'm not getting any of that interior green on the metallics. Here I'm adding some Vallejo Model Air White to some of the raised areas where I'm going to add some extreme highlights to the Plague Hulk. Here I'm adding Vallejo Game Air Sun Yellow, and this is a really extreme highlight, and it's actually going to start to make the model look a bit cartoony, which I don't want, but I'm going to rectify that later on with subsequent paint layers. Here I'm spraying Vallejo Game Air Earth Colour just to add a bit of colour diversity to the model, and also to tone down some of that really bright yellow that I added earlier. On my Facebook page recently, I was uploading pictures of one of the miniatures I was working on, and someone suggested it'd be a good idea to put like bruising around the sores, and I thought that was a fantastic idea, so that's what I've done on this model. I've added bruising by using hex leaching and just spraying ever so lightly around the edges, so it's really thin and translucent, the colour. I'm not worried that it's going on the inside of any of the swords, because they're going to be painted by hand afterwards. The paint around the sword is what's important. Here I'm airbrushing Games Workshop's Nurgle oil. This may take 2 passes as it goes on really thin with the airbrush, and you don't want to spray it too quickly at once because you'll get really extensive drips. Here I'm spraying Vallejo Game Air Bloody Red onto all of the large areas of open sores and wounds. Again, I'm not too worried if that bloody red goes on the outside of the large wounds, because it'll actually look really cool seeing that blended red mixing with the green. I've been raving about these new liquid pigments for quite some while on my Facebook page and telling people how good they are. Here I'm actually using them. So I'm using Live Colour's Deep Rust colour here and airbrushing it in sparing patches, because I'm going to mix it up with a different coloured rust in a moment. I'm working closer as I get to the Plague Hulk's body, making sure that I don't get too much of the rust on the body. I can touch it up later and it's not going to look too bad if a tiny amount hits it, but I am being quite careful not to get any on the Plague Hulk's body. Here I'm spraying Orange Marks from the Life Colour Rust paint set, and it's just to change up some of the colour tones of the rust, and it's going to make the Plague Hulk's metallics look really cool and give it that very Nurgle vibe. I highly recommend Life Colour's new Rust set. It's called the Rust Wizard, but you can, if you can't get hold of the Rust Wizard set by Life Colour, use regular acrylic paints. So you'll be looking at colours like burnt umber, oranges, deep browns. Anything that will give it a general rusty tone would work through the airbrush. It's just that these liquid pigments do work really well. Here I'm building up more rust effects, this time using traditional pigments. I'm sparingly placing them onto certain spots of the model that I really want to catch the viewer's eye. I'm also using different rust tones, so I'm using deep rust and standard rust, and I'm mixing it up so no two areas look exactly the same. Pigments remain active on the surface. What I mean by this is that by touching them with your hands, you'd rub the pigments off onto your hands, so they need to be sealed in. So here I'm using Vallejo's matte varnish to seal in all the pigments, but also I'm using this opportunity to protect all of the models, so I'm spraying around all of the Plague Hulk with the matte varnish to protect all the painted work I've done so far. After the varnish had dried, it's time to dry brush some Vallejo Game Air Silver onto the metallic areas, and it will add a really cool effect by just catching the edges. It will highlight all of the fine detail and really make those panels of the metallics pop. Working on such a large area requires a large brush, but don't feel you've got to spend an expensive amount. I'm using a brush here that was in a set of about 20 brushes for £3.50, and it was purchased from Home Bargains, I believe, in the UK. So for big tasks that require stress on a brush, use a cheap brush. That's what I recommend. Also, in the dry brushing stage, it's an idea to almost tickle at the model and not scrub at it. If you apply too much pressure, you'll get metallics on areas that you don't want. So be gentle and take more time, and you'll get a good result with your dry brushing. I've made my own wash using AK Interactive's Streaking Grime and 3 parts White Spirit. So that's 3 drops of White Spirit to 1 drop of Streaking Grime. I like working with enamels because they don't leave streaking that you can sometimes get with acrylic washes. They are a bit smelly though. The wash is going to dull down some of that really bright colours that we added earlier on and create some really nice shadows around those balls and pustules all over the Plague Hulk. Using a clean dry brush, I'm now applying pale yellow to all of the Plague Hulk's flesh. It's going to pick up all of that lovely detail on the boils. Again, I'm not scrubbing at the model, I'm almost tickling at it, so it's just a light feathering of the bristles over the model. Here I'm picking out some of the sore areas of the Plague Hulk by hand using the Vallejo Game Air Bloody Red. This is an airbrush acrylic, but it still can be used with a regular brush. I won't bore you guys by watching me paint what has got to be 100+ sores on this Plague Hulk. I'll just show you what it looks like once it's been completed with all the base colours. I've made a custom mix of paint here for the sores. I've added equal parts gloss varnish, glaze medium and paint. The paint mix was 3 parts gory red and 1 part black, then equal parts glaze medium and equal parts gloss varnish to make this bloody mixture. It sounds more complicated than it is to make, guys, and I've made it sound really complicated speaking it out, so I hope I made it clear. So it's 3 parts gory red, 1 part black, equal parts of gloss varnish and glaze medium, and this is what's going to give us that glistening bloody look to all of the sores. Here I'm doing another layer of dry brushing over the Plague Hulk skin, and it's going to pick up some of the areas that we've painted on the bloody red parts, and it's going to leave a cool effect. This is more of a heavy dry brush than before, and it's going to pick up some more of the raised areas. All of the warts and pustules are painted using Vallejo Game Colour Pale Yellow, and as you can see, using that pale yellow not as part of a dry brush really makes those warts and pustules pop. There were certain areas on the model that it was hard to airbrush the metallics, so I'm cheating here by actually just going straight for the rust stage, and I've mixed some MIG, standard rust and dark rust in a palette with some matte varnish, and it's made like a thin liquidy paste, and when it dries it'll dry matte and it'll give that rusted effect. I'm using Games Workshop's new technical paint. I think it's called Blood for the Blood God. And basically I'm spraying it in the direction where the blood spatter would actually come from, just towards the top of the blade. Here I'm going back over the tongue with that mix before, because I went a bit overzealous with the dry brushing around the tongue area, and I'm just touching up some of the intestines as well. Here I'm using the same matte varnish mix I mentioned a moment ago. The matte varnish was mixed in the palette with standard rust and dark rust by MIG. Here I'm using the tried and trusted method of sponge chipping. I place a little bit of chainmail onto some sponge, then I dry it off on kitchen roll and just dab it onto the rusted areas so they don't look so monotone. To give the Plague Hulk a really gross milky eye, and I used Stonewall Grey for this. Here I'm using Vallejo Game Air Brassy Brass just to highlight the edges of the armour plates. Here I'm using Agrax Earthshade on all of the brassy brass, and I'm also adding it to some of the areas of rust. Here I'm adding gloss varnish from Vallejo just to some of the pustules, not to all of them, just to differentiate the semi-glossy from the mix that I made earlier to super glossy. I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and if you have, please hit the like button and also please share it amongst friends. Also, I want to say a huge thank you once again to Ray for sending out the miniature to me. He's a really nice guy. And also to my sponsors, Goblin Gaming. Please check the description box down below and you'll find that direct link to their web store. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.